Hello, and welcome to the 2021-2022 Better Buildings webinar series, dedicated to bringing you the latest and actionable insights from leading industry experts. This annual series is a chance to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate energy efficiency adoption. We're going to give just a quick moment as all of our participants filter in today, and then we'll have a few housekeeping notes before we kick right into gear. So thank you all for joining. All right, starting to look like our attendee numbers are starting to stabilize, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we dive in, there are a few housekeeping points that I'd like to cover. Please note that today's webinar is going to be recorded and archived on the Better Building Solutions Center. We will follow up when today's recording and slides are going to be made available publicly. Also, all attendees are in listen-only mode, meaning that your microphones are muted. If you experience any audio or visual issues throughout the webinar, please send a message in the Q&A accessible at the bottom of your Zoom panel. If you can go to the next slide. My name is Kyle Saltzman, or one more slide, please. My name is Kyle Saltzman, and I'll be your moderator today. Along with Joe Invik, I lead the financing sector for the Better Buildings Challenge, which includes the financial allies who participate in the Better Buildings program. Prior to joining, I spent the last 5 years working at one of the financial allies, and I'm very excited to be speaking to you all today. Next slide, please. Today, we'll be discussing carbon and how organizations are using financing to track and reduce their carbon profiles. The need for organizations of all sizes to address carbon emissions has come into increasing focus in recent years. No longer constrained to mission-driven organizations, this call is being taken up by some of the largest corporations in the world. To date, nearly 40% of the Fortune Global 500 companies have declared public milestones committing to alter their carbon emissions, and this trend is only accelerating. These commitments are not only ambitious in size, but they're also proximate in timing, meaning that many pledges, which are using 2030 as a key deadline year, need to be taking actions today in order to be able to achieve these goals. Next slide, please. To inform and support organizations joining this movement, DOE has created the Better Climate Challenge. This is a greenhouse gas emissions reduction program that enables Better Buildings participants to articulate meaningful carbon reductions. Specifically, partnering organizations are going to commit to reducing their Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% within 10 years. And partners are also setting an energy efficiency target to support that, typically at a 20% reduction compared to an energy baseline. The Better Climate Challenge also allows participating organizations to share their progress and receive recognition for their successes as they achieve these goals. If you're interested in joining or learning more, please reach out to your Better Buildings account manager, or if you're a new partner, please email the Better Buildings inbox. And at the end of this organization, we'll have contact information available to you to do this. You can go to the next slide. DOE is also working with these partners to create resources that detail reduction pathways for all types of buildings and plants, along with real-world examples of how these pathways are being implemented. We've collected resources to support organizations at any point in this progress to advance these objectives. These resources run the gamut from technical resources on subjects like target calculations, which technologies are most impactful in their carbon reduction potential, and advice on how to build and expand stakeholder support for taking action. You can access this hub on the homepage of the Better Building Solutions Center. We'll also be including a link to this hub after this presentation. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to quickly highlight one of the resources that's available at this decarbonization resource hub, the Carbon Finance Decision Tree. There are a wide variety of internal and external financing methods available to fund the projects needed to change your carbon profile. And if you're still figuring out how to pay for these capital projects, this decision tree can help you see which approaches might best fit your needs, the needs of your organization, and the resources available to you. It lays out some key questions for consideration when trying to navigate the variety of options available. For instance, whether or not your organization has sufficient capital on hand to realize all of your carbon savings opportunities simultaneously, or if you're looking for opportunities to accelerate the rollout of these projects with a third-party financing partner. Alternatively, if your organization is interested in owning and installing and operating installed equipment on your own, or if you're open to support from a third-party operator, there are certain financing modes that might be best suited to meet your particular situations. This decision tree comes also with a fact sheet further detailing each financing approach for you to be able to learn more if you're curious about the full breadth of options available to you. If you go to the next slide, we'd like to start out by learning more about your experience financing carbon projects. So let's start off with a few polls using our interactive platform Slido for Q&A, which we'll be using today for Q&A, polling, and feedback. You can please now go to slido.com on your mobile device, or by opening a new window in your internet browser, you can enter today's event code, #DOE. You can use this space if you'd like to ask our panelists any questions, and you can submit them at any time throughout the presentation. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the presentation. You can also use this space to click thumbs up for questions that you want to have answered. That way we can focus on the most popular questions at the end of this presentation. So as you can see right now, people are starting to answer out this question. We first want to see who here, just how many organizations have either completed projects already using finance and how you're going about it. I'm seeing a lot of organizations are focusing, looks like an even mix between internal and external financing of some form. Some of you have had prior experience with energy as a service. That's great. Our panelists today will be diving into some of the specifics around efficiency as a service and green bonds during their remarks. Cool. This is really interesting. And it's great to hear that a number of organizations have already successfully completed some of the initial projects associated with their programs. Okay. Cool, that's really helpful background context. I'm confident that no matter where you are, you'll learn something new about some of the other options for financing your projects as we go through this presentation. Can you go on to the next poll, please? All right. Next, we'd like to learn more not only about the projects that you've completed and how you've completed them, but whether or not you've been measuring the impact of your projects. So you can go ahead and answer here. We can see, excellent, we've got a lot of organizations are using some type of an approach to track the ongoing impacts of their projects. Yeah, that's a clean majority using either self-monitored approaches or third-party verification approaches. As we'll be discussing today, evaluating the real impact of these projects is a key part of the ongoing management of carbon initiatives. Okay, then finally, can you move on to the third poll? Lastly, we'd like to learn more about you, the types of organizations that are joining us today. If you can quickly fill out the sector that best describes your organization and your interests, that would be very helpful. Cool. Looks like we got a large contingent from plants and higher ed, as well as some people joining from the support side, both government and service provider. Cool. So we got a wide variety of people today. But like I said, I think that all of you are going to be coming away with something new to learn. All right, let's switch back to our presentation so we can meet our speakers. We have a great lineup of presenters today. All three speakers are joining us from organizations that are themselves financial allies, participating in the Better Buildings Challenge. I'm really excited for them to share their unique perspectives with you. First, we'll be hearing from Anastasia Beckett, who is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Metris Energy. She leads the national team of business development managers covering commercial and industrial, as well as MUSH markets. After her, we'll be hearing from Guy Van Syckle, who is the director on the investment team at Hannon Armstrong, where he supports clients with funding for their variety of energy efficiency, renewable energy, electric vehicle deployments, resiliency, and sustainable infrastructure projects, among other types of projects. Finally, we'll be hearing from Greg Montgomery, who currently serves as the Managing Director of CleanSource Capital, a specialty finance affiliate of the Abundant Power Group. Greg is involved in both the design and the administration of clean energy and environmental sustainability financing programs based on the CleanSource Saves platform, and is the advising and structuring of financings for clean energy and environmental sustainability projects. And Thank you, all three of you, for being with us today. Next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it off to Anastasia Beckett to kick us off. Anastasia?
Great, thanks, Kyle. Appreciate the introduction. We can go ahead and just go to the next slide. I guess just before we start, wanted to say thanks everybody for joining, and hopefully the panelists here say something useful that you can bring back to your organizations. That's the goal today, is really to provide information for all of you. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm from Metris Energy. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of who we are and what we do. So Metrus develops, finances, and owns and operates large-scale energy efficiency and water efficiency projects through our sustainable energy as a service model. Our goal is really to help everybody reach their aggressive CO2 emission reduction goals through our solution. And our customers are really any large energy user. So whether you're somebody from higher ed or Fortune 500 or a city, our solution can work for you. Our partners are leading ESCOs, contractors, and lenders who help us put together the projects. And we've worked in 26 different states. We've been in business for 12 years. And our approach is really taking a holistic viewpoint of how our customers use their facilities and bundling different sites and measures together to achieve the aggressive CO2 emission reduction targets. And then also, we do a lot of ongoing carbon reporting and are helping to standardize the industry as well. So next slide. So just wanted to touch on the project structure. It's really pretty simple. There's two contracts. There's one between Metrus and the customer, and that looks a lot like a power purchase agreement, if you're familiar with that. The difference being that, the similarity being that we fund the project 100%, so it's an off-balance sheet solution for the customer, and then the customer agrees to pay us a portion of the savings over the duration of the contract. We also measure and verify all of the savings, and that's actually how the billing is calculated. You'll only pay for the actually realized savings rather than some set level of expected savings. So I think that's kind of a unique approach and really de-risk the projects for our customers. And then in addition to that, we have a contract with the ESCO partner or contractor who's going to be designing and building the installation. And that looks, just like an EPC type of contract. And that's where we're, hiring them and paying them to provide those services. Next contract or next slide. And so, there's a few different things on this slide, but really what I wanted to focus on is the concept of bundling project scope and project sites. And so what we do is, as mentioned, take a really holistic viewpoint of our customers' facilities. And so what we do when we go in is, listen to the customer. Usually there's some sort of impetus to them, wanting to do a project, whether it's some sort of equipment failure, that's their motivation on the facility side, or they're just trying to hit their, sustainability targets. We go in and take a look and see, what is appropriate for the way that they use the facility, and also, how we could put a project together to get them the most bang for their buck, essentially. So we'll bundle project measures that have a really short, simple payback, something like lighting or water or variable frequency drives, and use those savings to help pay for more complex measures, so that there can be a really, all-encompassing project for the company, for the customer. We also bundle different sites together. So I have a couple of examples of that. So if you could go to the next slide. So the first example is Daimler Trucks North America. This is a project that we did for a plant that they have in North Carolina. And really the reason that they wanted to do a project was twofold. It was to hit their sustainability targets, but also they had problems with their chillers. So they're, getting to the end of life, wanted to replace those chillers. And that by itself can be a little bit difficult because it's a really long payback item. They're very expensive. in terms of being able to replace that type of equipment. And so what we did is we went out, they had said that they did lighting upgrades, but we found a lot more that we could do. And doing that helped them pay for the chiller, the cooling tower, and the control system upgrades. So it was a way for us to be able to get all the projects done that they wanted within one project. Next slide. And then here is, an alternative case study. This is for a large Fortune 100 technology company who has distribution sites, all across the United States. And so they were really looking at their carbon emission reduction targets. And so what we did for them was take a look at, geographically what would make sense. So there's sometimes projects where it could be the same project scope, right? It's all lighting upgrades. But one site, say in a state that might have a low cost of power, like Iowa, perhaps, maybe doesn't pencil as well as a site that is in California that has a really high cost of power. And so what we do is we geographically put sites together that results in a net positive cash flow to the customer. So again, they're able to pick up these sites that they may not be able to fund it internally otherwise because of ROI requirements, simple payback requirements. And so it's a really good way to really pick up scope so that you can hit your carbon emission reduction goals. Next slide. And so, we provide a lot of ongoing support for our customers. And part of that, as mentioned, is the measurement and verification that happens on an either quarterly or annual basis. And this is just one simple example of the information that we provide to customers in a presentation. And then we can also provide the information, in spreadsheets or however you want to see it. But we're really breaking things down. And so you can see, cumulative, from a cumulative perspective here, we break down the CO2 savings by each year and then also by measure. So you can look at what did lighting do, what did the chiller do, and then we break it down again for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So it's a really good resource for you to be able to track your projects. And it also creates a baseline for you. So during the whole process of the design and installation, we're creating a baseline scenario for you for your business as usual, and that's what you can use to help with your benchmarking. So next slide. So kind of building on the concept of you've got a project in Iowa that has a low cost of power, and you got one in California that has a high cost of power. This is a kind of interesting concept, and our other panelist guy is going to go into it in more details because his company, Hannon, Armstrong, created this concept. But this is something we like to look at with our customers too, is from a carbon perspective, it's way more important to do projects in areas where the grid composition is a little bit dirtier, where they're using coal or other kind of dirtier sources of power to to provide electricity for the grid. That's going to have a lot more impact than doing a project in California or Hawaii, where they have a really high mix of renewable energy already in the grid. So it's just kind of an interesting concept that we utilize when we're reporting out for our customers. The next slide. And so we also use this when we're reporting out for ourselves, for our own company. We think it's important because of a few different reasons. Again, I'm touching on standardization here. It's important for companies, even the financiers, to be reporting out on the impact of our projects and doing that in a similar way so that customers or investors can take a look and be able to see an apples to apples comparison and see what's going on. And this is becoming more and more important for companies like ours, and then also for just other companies. The SEC is looking to provide guidance on how to report out on these measures. And I think that they're going to be giving some preliminary guidance by the end of the year, maybe the beginning of next year. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. But looking at this in terms of really creating a framework that everybody can use so it's easy to understand and people can, figure out, what's what. I think that's important too, because anytime you standardize things from a financial approach, you're going to be getting lower interest rates. That's just kind of how markets work. So this is actually a very important thing that will benefit kind of the whole ecosystem of sustainability. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to hand it over to Guy, who's going to be talking a lot more about carbon count. So thank you all.
Great, thank you so much, Anastasia. Just wanted to note, we received a few questions in the Zoom chat. Thank you so much for sending them in. As a reminder, you can submit questions for the Q&A focus, as well as the Q&A on slido.com using the event code #DOE. And with that, I'll pass it over to Guy.
Thanks, Kyle. And thank you much for Anastasia for kicking it off there. So excited to chat with everybody today, and thank you all for joining. If we want to jump to the next slide here. So, and we can do one more, two more. Let's see here. Yeah, that's just all of our legal jargon that we have as a public company, so you guys can have fun reading that later. We'll go one more. All right, so high level introductions. Guy Van Syckle, I'm a director on the credit investments team at Hannon Armstrong. What we do is we fund developers of sustainable infrastructure projects as they go around and build solar and wind and energy efficiency projects around the country. We fund the upfront cost and are paid back over time out of either the savings or the electricity generated by those projects. So the way that we work is we sell stock, we take those funds, and we go out and invest in a variety of projects. Those projects then generate revenue for us, which we then distribute back as dividends back to our shareholders. So for us, our key focus is exclusively investing in projects that reduce carbon emissions or have some other environmental benefit. You'll see there when we're talking about kind of other sustainable infrastructure classes beyond your standard wind and solar. We're talking about things like stormwater management, resiliency projects, and other things that basically enable us to further advance sustainable infrastructure. And we fund about $2 billion in projects a year. And so for us, it's very important thinking about when we are both supporting our customers, which again are the big ESCOs and engineering firms out there. So Johnson Controls, Siemens, Honeywell, SunPower. I'm sure I've forgotten a couple and won't mention a couple that are on this call, so apologies. But as we're doing that, it's really important to think about how are we prioritizing and focusing on projects with substantial and measurable impact. Next slide. All right, so for us, we look at projects all around the country, and again, are supporting a variety of customers. So the people at the end of the day, where our energy efficiency assets are being deployed are a variety of federal government facilities, commercial industrial clients, schools, hospitals. Really, for us, it's looking through to the credit of the counterparty, evaluating where they stand from that perspective, partnering with top engineering firms, and looking to fund that cost and getting paid back over time. So, one of the things, given our diversity of both projects and places where we invest, it's very important to think about how are we kind of comparing those and reporting on them in a way that is useful to our investor base, which I think matches well with how the underlying customers, the corporates, are trying to think about prioritizing projects. So we can go to the next slide. All right. And when we're thinking about that, as Anastasia mentioned, we use a methodology called carbon count, which is effectively trying to get to a levelized measure of what's the bang for your buck in terms of carbon based on a $1,000 unit of investment. So the way we do that is we look at, all right, if we are investing in a energy efficiency project under a energy as a service agreement with, let's say, a large automotive manufacturer. We're going to look at what does the installation of new lighting and HVAC equipment and controls do to reduce the consumption at that site. We then look at what is the grid mix. So this is something that we pull from the EPA e-grids resource that says what is the emissions factor in that particular region. That gives us the numerator of this equation, where we say, all right, this is the number of metric tons being reduced on an annual basis by this particular project. And then we divide that by the capital cost of the project. So again, that brings you back to kind of a bang for your buck measure. And this is impacted, as you see there at the bottom, both by the technology type that we're deploying, as well as the region in the country. Now, from our perspective, this doesn't make, residential solar not worth the investment, right? There are a whole host of other reasons why we invest in those spaces, but it's a way of framing concepts around what is most impactful and how companies can start thinking about, all right, if I have a limited amount of time, limited amount of budget, how can I start organizing my priorities? Next slide. And this is something that we do here. We offer a sustainability report card to all of our investors that lays out what has been the impact across all of the projects all of the investments we've made over the course of the year, trying to get as comparable and transparent and accountable with how we report. And so that's something that is offered a level of, I think, confidence to our investors about the importance of all this. And similarly, I think it's something that can offer a level of confidence to corporates and commercial clients, and certainly state and local officials as they think about trying to measure the impact of their initiatives, right? People are spending a whole lot of time working to decarbonize, but it's really important to offer your constituents a look at, all right, how did we do? How did we come out on the goals, and how efficient were we in that process? Certainly also that can be something that can be used to address policy and other initiatives. Next slide. And so this is one kind of tangible example of how this is becoming more and more useful for corporates, this type of bang for your buck assessment. You're now seeing, and I'm sure a number of the folks on the call work for organizations where there is a internal carbon price, and that's something that we're now seeing. It's like 10 to 30% of the top U.S. companies out there, and one of our clients, GridPoint, actually has been using that as it relates to one of their particular clients, Walgreens, and a number of their other clients, in looking at using basically carbon count as a selling point. So that has been a nice point, not only for customers to start thinking about, okay, this is how I prioritize projects and think about the impact, but also for ESCOs and developers to market their initiatives and different projects. Next slide. All right, and then finally, as we transition into to what Greg will be talking about on the green debt side, one thing that we do that helps us offer the lowest cost of capital to our clients is we look to bundle up our projects into green debt offerings that we can then place in the market, and are starting to see really oversubscribed. I mean, oversubscribed basically means excessive demand for green debt products, which then further drives down our cost of capital and our ability to offer the lowest cost of capital to our customers. So this has been a really interesting transition. Something, in all of these bonds, we put a carbon count on those bonds, which again has been very well received by the market, have gotten third-party ratings from Moody's and S&P, as it relates to the, us complying with the green bond principles, which basically states, the things that we are spending our money on and investing in are positive from an environmental standpoint. We are performing the necessary reporting requirements, but it has been a very promising shift in the market to see how much demand there is for this type of green product, and that you actually are starting to see pricing benefits associated with being very transparent in your reporting and making sure that there is quality green projects backing your debt. So this is a high level look at what we've been doing on that front. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap it up, and we can pass it over to Greg.
Wonderful. Thank you, Guy. And for our final speaker, we'll be hearing from Greg Montgomery. Greg, you can take it away.
Great, thank you, Kyle. And Guy, thanks for the lead up to the green bonds. If you'll go to the first slide. So just in looking at the Slido poll, it looks like no one has used green bonds to finance one of their carbon reduction projects. So I'll assume little knowledge, and I'll just provide a quick overview. First, a little bit about myself. As Kyle said, Managing Director of CleanSource Capital, based here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're the specialty finance affiliate of the Budget Power Group, and we design and administer financing programs using our SAVES platform, which is a two-stage underwriting process to both underwrite the project on the front end to fit whatever program is sponsoring the project, and then also the credit to make certain that it's financeable in the marketplace. And we've done 134 projects over time through the SAVES programs across 4 jurisdictions, $275 million in direct funding that supported $632 million in project financing, which, and we track the metrics associated with those projects: 225,000 megawatt hours reduced, 146,000 metric tons. This is on an annual basis. And also we track jobs from an economic impact as well. And we've been transitioning or expanding these programs to include green bonds because of, as Guy mentioned, the increasing demand in the marketplace on the buy side for sustainable and green financing in support of issuers' sustainability environmental programs, as well as the mandates of these purchasers and their investor clients to invest into climate change and green infrastructure. So green bonds have emerged as a financing tool to finance green projects where the bonds are verified, certified as meeting a certain framework. We'll talk a little bit about that more, where the framework ensures that the proceeds of the bonds are being used for the green projects in furtherance of the environmental policies and goals of the issuer in fighting climate change. And so best practices we'll talk about are to have a framework, to have the bonds reviewed against that framework, and then reporting, which is the subject matter of this webinar today. So just a little bit of background on green bonds. The International Capital Market Association saw the need to have a standardized framework so that both issuers and purchasers could have a harmonized way to address this market. And they published the Green Bond Principles in 2014 to bring some standardization to the market. They want to make sure that the proceeds are being used for an eligible project under the environmental program of the issuer, that the project was selected with that program in mind to achieve environmental sustainability policies and goals, and that the proceeds are being used for the project, and then reporting on the use of the proceeds and the project's impact over time. And then a best practice is once you have these principles in place, is for a third party to review the issuance of the bond against those principles to make certain that the bond comports, and then can be labeled as a green bond in the capital markets and the offering documents, and then over the life of the bond as it trades. The benefits that have accrued from having these principles put in place is as I said, the buy side and the sell side have come together on what is a good practice. It creates certainty in the capital markets and objectivity. But there's also a growing practice of standardizing the templates and the metrics for reporting, as you saw with Hannon Armstrong's tool, the carbon count. And then there's increasing focus on the part of the issuers to have these bonds further their policies. And then also transparency and regular reporting gives assurance that helps the market to grow. So if you'll go to the next page, you can see that the market has grown considerably since the voluntary green bond principles were published in 2014. The first green bond was done in 2012. ICMA saw the need for standardization, transparency, published the principles. And so the market has grown sevenfold from 2014 through 2020, approaching close to 300 billion in issuance in 2020. And this year in 2021, halfway through the year, the market was already at 200 billion. So we're looking at another record year this year for green bonds. Over 1.1 trillion have been issued to date. The United States is a top issuer of green bonds with 52 billion in 2020. And as this demand continues to increase, the execution on the placement of the bonds is improving, and that is resulting in some trends for favorable pricing. As books get oversubscribed, then there is the opportunity to decrease the pricing, which is to the ultimate benefit of the issuer in the long run. So if we go to the next slide. One of the best practices that is emerging is to establish a framework for the issuance of green bonds, so that the bonds can be independently reviewed and verified or certified as qualifying as green bonds in accordance with that framework. And a typical framework will have three sort of overarching design principles. It'll have policies and goals that are being supported, the environmental sustainability policies and goals. It will set forth the type of projects that are to be funded in furtherance of those policies and goals. And then it incorporates the green bond principles into the framework to provide that surety that the marketplace is looking for about the use of the proceeds, how the projects were evaluated and selected, how the proceeds are being expended on the project, and then reporting on both those expenditures as well as the ongoing impact based on a set of metrics that are designed for each particular project. And again, the third best practice that's emerging is to have these bonds reviewed against that framework to provide some assurance. So if we go to the next slide, the project evaluation selection is an important part of any green bond framework, so that again, the marketplace can see how the issuer chose the project and how it's supporting the policies and goals that are part of their framework and what they will be reporting on. And so examples, given this audience, the Better Building Challenge, the example of type of projects oriented towards the real estate market would be energy efficiency goals, renewable energy production goals, and greenhouse gas emissions goals, as well as other certifications or ratings. If we go to the next page, the reporting on the projects really is, there's threefold. There's the pre-issuance information, just about the framework and process itself. That's reported to the market so that the buyers can understand, what are the issuer's policies, goals, how are these projects in support of those goals. And then the post-issuance use of proceeds to ensure that the proceeds of the bonds are used for the project that's been selected. And then the ongoing standardized and regular impact reporting. That's both qualitative in terms of a description of the project and what the expected impact is, and then actually quantitative. You define metrics up front that you want to measure on an ongoing basis with a pre-identified measuring methodology, and then there's annual a measurement of the actual performance of the project against those metrics so that the market can see how the project's performing. And then that is reported on an annual basis to both the issuer and the purchasers. In the resource file, there's a copy of the voluntary green bond principles that we discussed earlier, as well as the ICMA's handbook for harmonized framework for impact reporting, which is a document that was recently put together in the last year or two by a group of stakeholders in this marketplace to try and arrive at a standardized framework for reporting. It's this handbook for harmonized frameworks is the most frequently used. There's MPSI position paper also has a framework for reporting on the impact. If you go to the next slide, so the type of metrics that would be measured and reported in association with a green project finance using green bonds, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, most green bonds that are reporting, and it's becoming best practice to do the annual impact. I think roughly 60% of the green bonds now do annual impact reporting, and that's been increasing significantly over the last couple of years. So there'll be 2 to 3 metrics that are measured. It can get more complicated, just depending on what the issuer is wanting to achieve and hold out to the marketplace. But if it's renewable energy, it's going to be the absolute kilowatt hours generated and capacity of the project. Energy efficiency would be reduction, and then the greenhouse gas emissions based on the based on the displacement of the energy taken from the grid using a methodology such as you heard Guy talk about. I mean, if you go to the next slide, these are just some examples taken straight out of the Harmonized Framework publication. We're showing what would be representative reporting templates for a renewable energy project or an energy efficiency project. So you can see, this is the name of the project, what the dollar amount financed, and how that was spread out, maybe across a portfolio of projects. It's not just a single project financing. What the lifetime of the project is, what's the expected annual generation, what's the capacity, and then the greenhouse gas reduction. And then same thing with energy efficiency, except for obviously it's the annual energy savings versus generation. So reporting doesn't have to be complicated. It can be fairly straightforward. And actually, the more straightforward and simple it is, the more transparent, the more certainty it provides in the marketplace. And that's what the green bond market is endeavoring to do, is working towards standardization, simplicity, and to bring confidence, so that, like Anastasia said, with that confidence comes investment dollars that follow, and that helps to reduce the pricing as the demand and confidence grows in the market. So I'm going to stop there, and you can see where green bonds can play a very important role in helping to bring this type of reporting to the marketplace.
Excellent, Greg. Thanks so much for that content. We're now going to shift into the Q&A portion. We're going to leave this slide up for just a second, as it has the login information to be able to access the field for submitting questions to the Q&A. And we're going to start going through some of the questions. So again, thank you all of our speakers today for that excellent information. To kick us off, we're going to start with a question about carbon count. So this is for either Anastasia or Guy. Have you seen any interesting patterns when comparing or contrasting the carbon count of different projects, maybe by technology, region, project size, or building types, and any trends there?
Sure, I can chime in there. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely really interesting. So not surprisingly, the projects with a faster payback have a higher carbon count, because basically savings are highly correlated with emissions. Savings basically tie into megawatt hours reduced. And so your classic lighting, controls, those types of projects are quite impactful. Now, what you do see is that, the bigger the project is, oftentimes, you're getting some economies of scale there, particularly on the renewables front. So, you see, obviously, with utility scale solar, having a higher carbon count than rooftop solar. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean that like one is inferior to the other, one's better than the other, but just considerations more broadly. Because obviously, as Anastasia said, it's really important to start thinking about, how do you basically take the savings offered by a lighting project and by just a standard controls project and use that to start paying for the longer payback items like your heavy boiler upgrades or heavy HVAC repairs or roof repairs or things like that. So that's one way that we think about it, but there's certainly a diversity across a variety of project types.
Interesting. And just a quick follow-up question on that, Guy. If an organization has already completed some of those low-hanging fruit projects, or the ones that would help combine with other longer-term payback projects, do you have any advice on how to, for organizations that are in that kind of a situation, trying to think about the intersection of these projects?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one way that we deal with that from a financier's perspective is basically extending the financing term. So it seems there's kind of a tendency to keep it pretty short, sort of in the 5 to 7 range. But, we do energy efficiency financings that go out 20, 25 years. And that really lets you get to those deeper payback type projects. It can be in the 15-year range, but when you're using that longer payback period to pay down those more expensive upfront costs, that can definitely be a way of, if you've already kind of capitalized on your shorter payback items.
Right. Just one thing to add on that too is that I think it's been our experience that when we do go in and do, investment grade audit, we almost always find some other low hanging fruit. So that's why it's important to have like the holistic viewpoint and not go in just saying like, oh, we're going to only look at, lighting or HVAC. Really like looking at things, because a lot of times customers aren't necessarily considering water, for example, and that can be a really good resource and a way to, put a better project together.
Interesting. Yeah. Next question, I'm going to start with you, Anastasia. It's about electrification, which is, have you had any direct experience with electrification projects or any recent trends in the space of electrification that you think would be important to explore?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely trending. We get a lot of questions about this, and it is something that we can do. And it's a little bit more of a unique approach. Sometimes it's maybe electrification of some equipment, but not, the entire building. We've definitely done projects like that. And then the biggest issues with it is a lot of times there's not a lot of, monetary savings associated with just looking at the pure replacement of the asset. And in those cases, there's a variety of things you can do. You can bundle it, like we've been saying, you can bundle it with other sites also, so there's a way to kind of balance it out that way and pick up savings from somewhere else and apply it towards electrification projects. But then, you can also look at it in terms of maybe some stipulated savings that would be applied to it. If you have something like an internal carbon tax, for example, that can be very helpful. And then you can assign some value to the electrification itself and include that as the savings in the project.
Interesting. Yeah. And would you mind just elaborating on the carbon tax program, just in case that's a new concept for anyone attending?
Sure. I mean, it's just a way to look at, if a company is really trying to reduce emissions, it's a way for them to motivate people, I guess. It's a little bit of a stick approach rather than a carrot approach, but it motivates people because it internally, when you're say you've got a manufacturing plant internally, you're going to get taxed if you're using like an internal tax and have to pay more to the corporate entity if you're, if you've got a dirty plant than you would if you were very efficient. So it's a way for I guess, internal motivation of projects.
Right. Okay. And the one other thing I'd add to that as well said, Anastasia, is that it's basically corporates looking to starting to hedge and manage their risk around further carbon regulation. And so getting ahead of that internally as states, as the US, as there start to be border adjustment tariffs. How do you get ahead of that and make sure you're preparing for potential policy headwinds that are going to eventually come in and affect your business model?
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely see transition risk as a highly motivating trait to for some of the organizations adopting carbon reduction strategies. Greg, I got a question in here for you, which is when it comes to some of the metrics traits on green bond issuances, what happens if the reported metrics show an under or non-performance? Does this present a potential additional risk spectrum for organizations issuing a green bond?
No, you would. I mean, you would have the appropriate disclaimer language. It would just reflect poorly on the issuance and on the issuer, and so it could impact, the pricing of the bond in the secondary market, particularly if it retains that green bond label and the original purchasers want to resell it. But it also could impact the credibility and reputation of the issuer for a future issuance. But there's no, I mean, your counsel can protect you from legal responsibility. Again, I think people would rather know that a project's underperforming than not, and find out about it secondhand through the marketplace. So I mean that credibility could help an issuer, particularly if they take corrective measures to improve the performance. And again, that's part of what the transparency and accountability is all about, right?
Yeah, fair. And how would you phrase, given the similarities between a green bond issuance and more standard debt vehicles, how would you pose the primary benefit of doing a capital raise through a green bond issuance versus a standard debt?
It's the features that you would consider as advantages for bond issuance. Anyway, larger size, longer term, less covenants, but it's also just the increasing number of participants in the capital markets that are looking for this, and so the ability to drive demand and improve pricing. I mean, there are many financings where bonds would not be appropriate. Where it'd be better to do green bank debt or other types of financing, such as you've heard on the webinar here today. So bonds serve a purpose in the marketplace, and it just happens that if they're in support of a framework with an environmental sustainability program, then they can be labeled green to help satiate the demand in the marketplace for these type of environmental financial instruments.
Got it. So you're saying there's unique demand for lending into these types of projects that wouldn't express itself through standard debt, but would through green bonds.
Well, I mean, it's just when you would use bonds and in any type of project finance, I mean, typically they're larger issuances just because of the fixed cost associated with it.
Yeah, and I can just give a example of that. So someone like Blackrock is a purchaser of Hannon green bonds, and the fact that our bonds are denoted, with a green classification and also have that carbon count reporting on them allows Blackrock to then meet its broader ESG demands and drop it into its portfolio of funds that have now committed, billions of dollars to funding green projects. So it's basically a way of satiating all of these financial commitments that are coming into the market, but also making sure there's a good deal of accountability as they do that. And one thing that we did recently was a $100 million commercial paper issuance, which basically is a very short-term green bond. So, a month to 3 months. But that's also tapping into a different demand of the market. So all of those funds then just go to fund all of our construction accounts and things like that. But that's what you're seeing is with all these emerging funds, they need a place to put those dollars. And so you want to make sure there's a high degree of transparency and accountability to that.
Great, thank you. Anastasia, let's start with you for this next question. So someone was asking how each of your organizations works with owners who have maybe completed a building project or two and are now looking to expand through a third-party partner to focus on rolling this out to multiple sites.
Okay, so the question is that they've already done a couple of sites and they're wanting to expand their, like, say, manufacturing footprint and acquire other sites, or?
Yeah, that's right. They've done it at a single building and are now trying to figure out how to get it from that one building to many buildings.
Oh, okay. So they've done like a pilot project potentially and are looking to expand that to all of their facilities. Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we specialize in. So what we would do is, you know, take a look at the different facilities that they want to, you know, roll out. Look at what measures would be right for those different facilities. We usually do, you know, like a preliminary audit that gives us some sense of where we should be looking in terms of asset composition. And then it really depends on the type of buildings, you know, so if they're all something kind of simple like office space or, you know, like a distribution center or something like that, that might be a little bit of a different approach than if it was all bespoke manufacturing that would probably have a little bit more unique characteristics to the composition of the project makeup. Like, for example, we just did a very large manufacturing plant for a brewer. That's going to be a very different project composition than it is for, you know, an office. But we take care of all of it, bundle it together. So we usually will finance it in say $20 million tranches at a time or so, and kind of roll it out in coordination with the construction efforts. Because a lot of times, you know, you don't want construction in like every single facility at the same time either. So you don't want to create a mess for everybody. But really, you know, it's the same method for looking at that pilot site. You're just applying it to more sites. So it's actually, you know, pretty simple. Sometimes there's a little bit of a difference if the individual sites have their own P&L. You know, you have to work a little bit more closely with the site personnel in those cases. But it's really the same approach. It's just as easy to do, you know, a 20 million multi-site project as it is to do one pilot that's, you know, tiny. So that's kind of the end answer there is like, it's the same. It's an easy approach, and you're going to get lower interest rates if you do more size. So it makes a lot more sense to do a 20 million multi-site project than a, you know, $300,000 one site project.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Okay, I think to wrap it up for our final question, this will I'll give each of you a chance to respond to this one, starting with you, Greg. So in one sentence, can you take a stab at articulating either a recent change or a needed change, be it in technology, policy, frameworks, what have you, that you think is going to have the biggest acceleration impact in terms of more organizations actually reducing their carbon emissions?
I think it's these 2030, 2050 carbon reduction goals and the motivation there. And you asked for one sentence, so this is going to be a long sentence. Which in the advent of really holistic planning, you're starting to see that across institutions, municipalities, governments, where they are doing comprehensive planning up front to commit to technologies, programs that are going to reduce the carbon footprint. I think those goals are very commendable.
Great, cool. Let's go to Guy next and then finish up with Anastasia.
Sure. So I think getting into a very regimented cadence of how you're going to roll this across your organization and thinking about, you know, this not just being managed by kind of the sustainability or the energy manager, but having a holistic thought on how do you do this most efficiently. One of the things we're seeing with all these, you know, corporates out there is, and these are Fortune 100, Fortune 500 manufacturers and such, is they try and basically fit these projects into their existing, how they buy equipment and random widgets. And it's different than that. You really should be thinking of this, okay, I have a goal to do energy efficiency projects. I need to have a contract that I can do this under efficiently, as opposed to trying to squeeze it into like equipment purchase orders. That's probably the biggest headwind we've seen, just like on the ground, getting things done. But it's great to see the initiatives. It's important to make sure they're actually pushed down to the, implementers and the acquisition levels for the people that are running these various sites and facilities.
Cool. Thanks. Anastasia?
Sure, I agree with both sentiments there, particularly on the procurement side. It's important for the financial folks at organizations to be involved in these projects early, and have it come from that rather than come from procurement, because it's not like buying pencils. It's like a totally different process. So that usually runs a lot smoother. Something I'd say is also in terms of the organizational planning, that's super important. It's great to see the 2030 goals, but at some point you need to take action, and energy efficiency is going to be part of any plan. So there's no real reason to wait to do it. I think that we have time is of the essence here. Like, we gotta, do projects in order to hit those goals, and you gotta start now.
Yeah, and great to just reflect on each of your answers that these changes are all internal to organizations. They don't require an exogenous change, that everyone is set up now to be able to do these holistic types of programs. Cool. So if we can bring up the slides again, we've got a couple additional closeout slides here. So first, I want to talk about the Better Buildings webinar series. This webinar was part of the 2021-2022 Better Buildings webinar series. And as you can see, we have a great lineup of presentations all the way through April. You can visit the Better Buildings Solution Center to learn more about each of these sessions and to register. The next webinar, if you go to the next slide, please. We hope you'll join us on November 16th for the next webinar titled Cleaner, Better, Faster, Stronger, Industrial Adoption of Renewables. Join this webinar to learn more about renewable energy technologies and their benefits, as well as a wide range of purchasing options that can benefit U.S. industrial organizations in particular. Go to the next slide for additional resources. If you're interested in learning more about some of the topics we discussed today, I encourage you to download our additional resources handout from the Zoom chat box. This handout contains links to the resources on the Better Buildings and from our speakers, and it's accessible today, though all of these resources will also be available when the slides are published soon. And with that, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for taking the time to be with us today. Feel free to contact the presenters directly using the contact information listed here if you have additional questions, or if we weren't able to address your questions during the Q&A period. I encourage you all to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on LinkedIn and Twitter for the latest news. You can find our handles by the respective icons on the lower left-hand side of the screen. Lastly, you will receive an email notice when today's recording slides and transcripts are available on the Better Buildings Solution Center. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.